The rain hammered against the windows of the Moretti estate like 1,000 tiny fists demanding entry. Elena Vasquez stood in the marble foyer, her second-hand dress clinging to her skin, her dark hair plastered to her pale face. She looked like a drowned sparrow that had somehow wandered into a palace built for wolves. She had never felt smaller in her entire 24 years of life. The butler who had admitted her stood at a careful distance, as though poverty might be contagious. He had looked at her borrowed shoes, at the fraying hem of her dress, and his lip had curled almost imperceptibly before he gestured for her to wait. So she waited. The foyer alone was larger than the entire apartment she shared with her younger brother. Crystal chandeliers caught the dim light filtering through rain-streaked windows, casting fractured rainbows across walls adorned with Renaissance paintings that probably cost more than she would earn in 10 lifetimes. The floor beneath her feet was black marble veined with gold, so polished she could see her own reflection staring back at her. A ghost of a woman who had run out of options. Her father had been dead for 6 months now. 6 months since the heart attack had stolen him away, leaving behind a mountain of debts that Elena hadn't known existed. Gambling debts. The kind you couldn't pay off with payment plans and good intentions. The kind that came with broken kneecaps and shallow graves if you failed to honor them. $200,000. She had sold everything. The house, the car, her mother's jewelry, the few pieces her father hadn't already pawned. She had worked 3 jobs until her feet bled and her eyes burned from exhaustion. She had begged and borrowed from everyone she knew. It wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough. And now the debt had been purchased by someone else. Someone who had summoned her here tonight with a single sentence delivered by a man in an expensive suit. Dante Moretti wants to discuss the terms of your repayment. Everyone in the city knew that name. Dante Moretti, the youngest don in the history of the Moretti crime family. A billionaire who had built his legitimate empire on the bones of his enemies and the ashes of anyone foolish enough to cross him. The newspapers called him a businessman, a philanthropist, a bachelor whose face graced the society pages as often as the financial ones. The streets called him something else entirely, the Butcher of Manhattan. Elena's hands trembled at her sides. She clasped them together, willing herself to be still, to be calm, to be anything other than the terrified girl she felt like in this moment. She had come here prepared to beg, to offer whatever payment plan he would accept, to promise him anything within reason if he would just give her more time. She was not prepared for the man who finally descended the grand staircase. Dante Moretti moved like smoke and shadow given form. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that tapered to a narrow waist, every line of his body speaking to barely contained power. His hair was black as a raven's wing, swept back from a face that seemed carved from marble by an artist who understood that true beauty could be terrifying. High cheekbones, a strong jaw shadowed with stubble, a mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. But it was his eyes that made Elena's breath catch in her throat. They were gray, not the soft gray of morning mist or the gentle gray of dove feathers. This was the gray of storm clouds, of gunmetal, of gravestones. They swept over her with clinical precision, cataloging, assessing, dismissing, all in the space of a single heartbeat. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her yearly salary. No tie, the collar of his white shirt opened just enough to reveal the edge of black ink crawling up his neck. Tattoo. She wondered what it depicted. She wondered why she was wondering at all when she should be focusing on survival. Miss Vasquez, his voice was deep, smooth, with just a hint of an accent that spoke to his Italian heritage. He didn't offer his hand. He didn't smile. He simply stood at the base of the stairs and looked at her like she was a problem to be solved. "You're late." "The bus," she started. "I don't care." He turned and began walking down a corridor lined with more artwork, more obscene wealth, more evidence of the gulf between their worlds. "Follow me." Elena followed. What choice did she have? He led her to a study that smelled of leather and old books and something darker, whiskey, perhaps, or the lingering ghost of expensive cigars. A fire crackled in a massive stone fireplace despite the warmth of the summer night. The walls were lined with bookshelves, and a massive mahogany desk dominated the center of the room like a throne. Dante Moretti settled into the leather chair behind the desk and gestured to the seat across from him. Elena sat, perching on the edge like a bird ready to take flight at the slightest provocation. For a long moment he simply studied her. Those gray eyes tracked over her face, her hair, the cheap fabric of her dress, the worn leather of her shoes. She felt stripped bare under that gaze, every flaw and imperfection exposed to his scrutiny. "Your father owed my associate $200,000, he said finally, his tone as casual as if they were discussing the weather. Before his unfortunate death, he had made arrangements to pay off this debt through services rendered. Services that are no longer available to me, given his current state of existence." Elena's stomach turned. She didn't want to know what kind of services her father had promised. Didn't want to think about what he had been involved in, what secrets he had kept from her all those years. "I've been paying back what I can," she said, hating the tremor in her voice. "I've given everything I have. I just need more time." "Time," he said the word like it tasted bitter on his tongue. "Everyone wants more time, more chances, more mercy." He leaned forward, and the firelight caught the planes of his face, turning him into something almost demonic. "Do I look like a merciful man to you, Miss Vasquez?" "No." He looked like a man who had never known mercy and wouldn't recognize it if it walked up and introduced itself. "Please," she whispered. "I have a brother. He's only 16. If something happens to me—" "Nothing will happen to you." He waved a dismissive hand. "Dead bodies are bad for business. And you're worth more to me alive than in the ground." Worth more alive. The words should have been comforting. They weren't. "Then what do you want from me?" He was quiet for so long that Elena thought he might not answer. He simply watched her, those storm cloud eyes revealing nothing, his face an impenetrable mask. The fire crackled. Rain continued its assault on the windows. Somewhere in the house, a clock chimed midnight. "I'm 32 years old," he said finally, his voice soft in a way that was somehow more frightening than if he had shouted. "In 5 years, I will turn 37. According to the terms of my grandfather's will, if I haven't produced an heir by that time, everything, the business, the properties, the family legacy, goes to my cousin Marco."
Elena blinked.
Of all the things she had expected him to say, this wasn't even on the list. "I don't understand what that has to do with me. I need a child." The words were blunt, brutal, stripped of any pretense or softening. "I need a woman who will give me an heir. Someone with no ties to any of the families, no agenda, no expectations of becoming the next Mrs. Moretti." His eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that made her want to look away. "Someone who will provide me with what I need, and then disappear from my life completely." The room tilted. Elena gripped the arms of her chair, certain she had misheard him, certain this was some kind of elaborate joke or test. "You want me to? You're asking me to have your baby?" "I'm not asking." He pulled a document from his desk drawer and slid it across the polished surface toward her. "I'm offering you a deal. Give me a child, a healthy child, preferably a son, though I'm not particular, and your debt is gone. Erased. As if it never existed. I'll also provide your brother with a full scholarship to any university he chooses, along with a trust fund that will ensure neither of you ever has to worry about money again." Elena stared at the contract like it was a coiled snake ready to strike. Her mind raced, thoughts tumbling over each other in a chaotic jumble. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen in the real world. Men like Dante Moretti didn't pluck women out of poverty and offer them deals that sounded like they belonged in fairy tales. Dark fairy tales. The kind where the princess was devoured by the wolf instead of saved by the prince. "And if I refuse?" His expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Something cold and final. "Then you have 30 days to come up with $200,000, plus interest." After that, he shrugged one elegant shoulder. "I'm sure you can imagine the consequences." She could. That was the problem. "Why me?" she heard herself ask. "You could have anyone. Women who would jump at the chance to be with you. Why choose someone who—" Who has no choice? He smiled then, and it was the most terrifying thing she had seen all night. A flash of white teeth, predatory and knowing. Precisely because you have no choice. You'll sign the contract. You'll fulfill your end of the bargain. And when it's done, you'll take your money and your brother and you'll disappear, because that's what the contract demands.
Noi mouschen el kamplekashchens. No caste di battles. No messinis.
You want me to give up my child. I want you to give me my heir. There's a difference. He tapped the contract with one long finger. You have 24 hours to decide. I suggest you use them wisely. Elena took the contract with numb hands. The pages felt heavy, weighted with consequences she couldn't fully comprehend. She should refuse. She should throw the papers in his face and walk out of this mansion and never look back. But then she thought of Miguel, her sweet, brilliant brother who had been accepted to 4 different universities and couldn't afford to attend any of them. Her brother who still had nightmares about the men who had come to their apartment 3 months ago, demanding payment, leaving bruises on his arms when Elena couldn't produce the money they wanted. She thought of the life insurance policy that didn't exist, the savings account that had been drained years ago, the future that had been stolen from her before she ever had a chance to build it. 24 hours, she repeated, her voice hollow. Dante Moretti nodded once. A king dismissing a supplicant. My driver will take you home. I expect your answer by midnight tomorrow. She left the study in a daze, clutching the contract to her chest like a lifeline or a death sentence. She couldn't tell which anymore. The butler appeared out of nowhere to escort her to the waiting car, and she sat in the back seat watching the rain-blurred lights of the city slide past the window, wondering how her life had come to this moment. 24 hours to decide whether to sell her soul or lose everything she had left. The devil, she thought, had never looked so beautiful. She spent those 24 hours pacing the tiny apartment, reading the contract over and over until the legal jargon blurred before her exhausted eyes. Miguel watched her with worried eyes, asking questions she couldn't answer, offering help she couldn't accept. The terms were clear, clinical, horrifyingly thorough. She would live in the Moretti estate until the child was born. She would receive the best medical care money could buy. She would want for nothing during the pregnancy. Anything she needed, anything she desired would be provided. In exchange, she would sign away all parental rights the moment the child drew its first breath. She would leave the estate within 48 hours of delivery. She would never contact the child, never seek custody, never attempt to interfere in its life in any way. And there, buried in the middle of the contract, a clause that made her heart stutter in her chest. The method of conception will be determined at the sole discretion of Dante Moretti. Not artificial insemination. Not a clinical, sterile procedure in a doctor's office. He intended to conceive this child the old-fashioned way. Elena set the contract down with trembling hands. She walked to the window of her apartment and stared out at the city that had chewed her up and spit her out. The city that had taken her parents and left her with nothing but debt and desperation. She thought about her mother, who had died of cancer when Elena was 12, who had held her hand in the hospital and made her promise to take care of her father and brother, to be strong, to survive. She thought about Miguel, asleep in the next room, dreaming of a future that was slipping further away with each passing day. She thought about herself at 24, already so tired, already so worn down by life, with nothing left to give except the one thing Dante Moretti wanted. At 11:47 p.m., she signed the contract. At midnight, she called the number printed on the last page and spoke 2 words to the man who answered, "I accept." The car came for her the next morning. The first month in the Moretti estate was a study in surreal contrasts. Elena had been given a suite of rooms larger than her entire apartment, decorated in shades of cream and gold, with a 4-poster bed that felt like sleeping on a cloud and a bathroom with a tub big enough to swim in. A personal maid attended to her every need. A private chef prepared whatever meals she requested. A doctor visited twice a week to monitor her health and ensure she was in optimal condition for what lay ahead. But she was also a prisoner. She was not allowed to leave the estate grounds without an escort. Her phone had been confiscated and replaced with one that could only call pre-approved numbers. Her brother was permitted to visit once a week, in a sitting room monitored by security cameras, their conversations carefully observed. And Dante was everywhere and nowhere. She would catch glimpses of him in the halls, always immaculate, always surrounded by men in dark suits who spoke in hushed voices and deferred to his every word. He would acknowledge her with a nod, nothing more, those gray eyes sliding past her as though she were a piece of furniture that had been rearranged. They had dinner together every night. It was one of the terms she hadn't fully understood until the first evening, when she was informed that her presence was expected in the formal dining room at precisely 8 p.m. They sat at opposite ends of a table long enough to seat 20, eating in silence broken only by the clink of silverware and the occasional murmured instruction to the staff. Elena learned to count the courses, 6, always 6, and to pace herself so she wouldn't finish before he did. She learned which fork to use for which dish, which glass was for water and which for wine, how to navigate the elaborate dance of wealth and privilege that seemed to come so naturally to him. She learned nothing about the man himself. He didn't ask about her life, her family, her hopes, or dreams. He didn't make small talk or offer explanations for the world she had stumbled into. He simply sat at his end of the table, a king surveying his domain, and reminded her with every silent meal that she was here for a purpose and nothing more. On the night of the summer solstice, everything changed. Elena had retreated to her room after dinner, as she always did, to read or stare at the ceiling or try not to think about what was coming. She had been in the estate for 6 weeks now, and still nothing had happened. Still, Dante treated her like a stranger, and she was beginning to wonder if he had changed his mind. If this was all some elaborate game she didn't understand the rules to. The knock on her door came at midnight. She opened it to find him standing in the hallway, his jacket discarded, his sleeves rolled up to reveal muscular forearms marked with more of that black ink she had glimpsed the first night. His hair was disheveled, his eyes darker than she had ever seen them. "Tonight," he said, and there was something in his voice, something rough and raw and almost human, that made her breath catch. "Unless you've changed your mind." She hadn't. She couldn't afford to. But standing there in her nightgown, looking up at this man who held her entire future in his hands, Elena felt something she hadn't expected. Not fear. Not resignation. Defiance. "I haven't changed my mind," she said, lifting her chin. "But I have conditions." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or amusement. "The contract. The contract says the method is at your discretion. It doesn't say I have to make it easy for you." She stepped back, opening the door wider. "You want me to do this? Fine. But you'll look at me when it happens. You'll say my name. You'll remember that I'm a person, not just a vessel for your air." The silence stretched between them, taut as a wire about to snap. Then Dante Moretti did something Elena had never seen him do before. He laughed. It was a short sound, almost startled out of him, and it transformed his face in ways she couldn't have imagined. For just a moment he looked younger, almost human. "You're either very brave or very foolish," he said, stepping into her room and closing the door behind him. "I'm neither." She stood her ground even as he moved closer, even as his presence seemed to fill the entire space until there was no room left for anything but him. "I'm just tired of being invisible." He stopped an arm's length away, close enough that she could see the individual threads of silver woven through the gray of his eyes, close enough to count the heartbeats thrumming at the base of his throat. "Elena," he said, and her name in his mouth was a revelation, a prayer, a curse. "Your conditions are acceptable." What happened next was not what she expected. She had braced herself for coldness, for efficiency, for a transaction completed with as little emotion as a business deal. She had prepared to close her eyes and count the minutes until it was over. But Dante was gentle, devastatingly, impossibly gentle. His hands were slow and careful as they mapped the geography of her skin. His mouth was soft against her shoulder, her collarbone, the racing pulse at her throat. He whispered her name like a secret he was afraid to speak too loudly, and when he looked at her, when he truly looked at her for the first time, Elena saw something in those storm cloud eyes that made her heart crack wide open. Hunger, loneliness, a desperate, aching need that mirrored her own. Afterward, she expected him to leave, to retreat back to his side of the estate and pretend nothing had happened, the way they had been pretending since she arrived. Instead, he stayed. He lay beside her in the darkness, one arm thrown across her waist, his breathing slowly evening out as sleep pulled him under. Elena watched the moonlight paint shadows across his face and wondered how she was supposed to survive this, how she was supposed to give this man a child and then walk away, never looking back, never letting herself think about what might have been. In the morning, he was gone, but something had shifted between them, a tectonic plate moving beneath the surface of their carefully constructed arrangement. She saw it in the way his eyes lingered on her at dinner. She felt it in the brush of his fingers against hers when he passed her a glass of wine. She heard it in the questions he started asking. Small ones at first, almost tentative, as though he was relearning a language he had forgotten how to speak. "Tell me about your mother," he said one night, 3 weeks after the solstice, as they sat in the library watching a summer storm rage outside the windows. So she did. She told him about Maria Vasquez, who had come to America with nothing but a suitcase and a dream, who had worked 3 jobs to put herself through nursing school, who had fallen in love with a charming Irish-American man who swept her off her feet and gave her 2 beautiful children before revealing the gambling addiction that would eventually destroy everything she had built. She told him about the cancer, about the months of treatment, about holding her mother's hand at the end and promising to be strong. And then, because he was watching her with those storm cloud eyes that seemed to see right through to her soul, she asked him the question she had been wondering since the night she had first set foot in his home. "Why do you need an heir so badly? What happens if your cousin inherits instead?" Dante was quiet for a long time, long enough that Elena thought he wouldn't answer, that she had finally pushed too far, crossed some invisible line she couldn't see. Then he said, "Marco killed my sister." The words landed like stones in still water, sending ripples of shock through Elena's entire body. "It was ruled an accident," Dante continued, his voice flat, emotionless. The voice of a man who had learned to lock his pain away where no one could reach it. "A car crash on a mountain road. Brake failure. Tragic," everyone said. "Such a loss." Everyone said. His jaw tightened. "I know it was him. I've always known. But I could never prove it, and my grandfather refused to believe his golden boy could do such a thing." Dante. Isabella was 17. He turned to look at her, and Elena saw the ghost of that 17-year-old girl in the hollow spaces of his eyes. She wanted to be a veterinarian. She loved horses. She used to follow me around the estate when we were children, begging me to play with her, and I was always too busy, too important, too focused on becoming the man my father wanted me to be. He stood abruptly, walking to the window, his back a wall of tension and old grief. "I will not let Marco have this family. I will not let him profit from her death. I will burn this entire empire to the ground before I let him take what should have been hers." Elena rose and went to him. She didn't touch him, didn't dare, but she stood close enough that he could feel her presence, close enough to offer whatever comfort her nearness might provide. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I'm so sorry about your sister." He didn't respond. He didn't move. But after a moment, his hand found hers in the darkness, and he held on like she was the only thing keeping him tethered to the earth. The weeks that followed were unlike anything Elena could have imagined. Dante began joining her for breakfast as well as dinner. He started appearing in the library when she was reading, settling into the chair across from hers with his own book or a stack of business documents. His presence a quiet comfort she hadn't known she needed. He took her for walks in the estate's elaborate gardens, pointing out the flowers his mother had planted years ago, the bench where he used to sit with Isabella, the view of the city that he had loved since childhood. He told her about his childhood, the expectations, the pressure, the loneliness of being groomed from birth to lead an empire built on blood. He told her about his father, who had been cruel and demanding and impossible to please. He told her about his mother, who had died when he was 12, leaving him alone with a man who saw him as a tool rather than a son. In return, Elena shared pieces of herself she had never shown anyone. Her fears, her dreams, the guilt she carried about her father, about not seeing the signs, about not being able to save him from himself, the desperate, clawing hope she held for Miguel, her determination to give him the life he deserved even if it cost her everything she had. They talked for hours, sometimes until the sun came up, and Elena felt something growing between them that she couldn't name and didn't dare examine too closely. She was falling in love with him. The realization hit her like a physical blow one morning as she watched him across the breakfast table, arguing with someone on the phone in rapid Italian, his brow furrowed with concentration, his free hand gesturing emphatically at points only he could see. He caught her staring and paused mid-sentence, his expression softening into something almost tender before he returned his attention to the call. That look, that single, unguarded moment. It undid her completely, but love was not part of the contract. Love was not something Dante Moretti wanted or needed. Love was a complication, a liability, the very thing he had specifically designed their arrangement to avoid. So Elena locked her feelings away in a box deep inside her chest and pretended they didn't exist. She smiled at breakfast and laughed at dinner and let him hold her in the quiet hours of the night, and she told herself it was enough. It had to be enough. The doctor confirmed her pregnancy 8 weeks after the solstice. Elena sat on the examination table in the private medical suite Dante had installed on the estate, staring at the ultrasound image the doctor had printed for her. It was barely more than a blob, a tiny cluster of cells that didn't look like anything yet, but it was there, growing, real. She was going to have a baby. Dante's baby. A baby she would have to give away. The grief hit her so suddenly and so violently that she couldn't breathe. She pressed a hand to her mouth, trying to hold back the sob that was clawing its way up her throat, and that was how Dante found her when he burst through the door moments later. Curled in on herself, tears streaming down her face, clutching a photograph of the child she was already mourning. Elena, he was across the room in 3 strides, pulling her into his arms, pressing her face to his chest. What happened? What's wrong? Is the baby? The baby's fine. She choked the words out between sobs. The baby's fine. I can't. Understanding dawned in his eyes. She saw it happen, watched the realization sweep across his features, and leave something raw and wounded in its wake. The contract, he said quietly. She nodded, unable to speak. He held her for a long time, his hand stroking slowly through her hair, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. When her tears finally subsided, when she could breathe again without feeling like her chest was being crushed, he pulled back just enough to look at her. What if I changed it?
Elena blinked.
What? The contract, his voice was rough, uncertain in a way she had never heard before. What if I changed the terms? You can't just. It's my contract. I can do whatever I want with it. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears that still clung to her cheeks.
Elena,
I never expected this. I never expected you. When I wrote that contract, I was thinking like a businessman. An heir was an asset I needed to acquire, and you were the means to acquire it. I didn't consider. He trailed off, struggling with words that seemed foreign to him. You didn't consider what? She whispered. That I would feel this way. His forehead dropped to rest against hers, his eyes closing. That I would wake up every morning and look for you before I looked for anything else. That I would count the hours until dinner just so I could see your face across the table. That I would lie awake at night with you in my arms and wonder how I ever slept before you were there. Elena's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he must be able to feel it. Dante. I'm not good at this, he pulled back, and she saw the vulnerability in his eyes, the fear of a man who had spent his entire life building walls and was now watching them crumble. I'm not good at feelings, at love. My father taught me that love was weakness, and I believed him for a very long time. And now I think he was wrong. His hand moved to her stomach, pressing gently against the place where their child was growing. Now I think love might be the only thing that makes any of this worthwhile. What are you saying? He took a breath, Then another. She watched him gather his courage like armor before a battle. And she loved him so much in that moment that she thought her heart might burst. "I'm saying stay," he said finally. "Not because of the contract. Not because of the debt. Stay because I'm asking you to. Stay because I want you here, you, Elena, not just the mother of my child. Stay because I think I might be falling in love with you, and I don't know what to do with that. But I know I don't want to find out what my life looks like if you leave." Elena started crying again, but this time the tears were different, lighter, full of something that felt terrifyingly like hope. "I don't know how to do this either," she admitted. "I never planned to fall in love with you. You were supposed to be a monster, a means to an end, something I could survive and then forget." "I am a monster," his voice was gentle, almost sad. "I've done terrible things, Elena. Things that would make you look at me differently if you knew. I'm not a good man." "Maybe not," she reached up to touch his face, tracing the line of his jaw, the curve of his cheek. "But you're not the man I thought you were either. You're complicated. You're broken. You're trying so hard to be better than what you were raised to be, and you don't even realize that's what you're doing. You see too much. Maybe," she smiled through her tears, "or maybe you don't let anyone see enough." He kissed her then, soft and slow and full of promises neither of them was sure they could keep. And when he finally pulled away, there was something in his eyes she had never seen before. "Peace. The contract is void," he said. "All of it. The debt, the terms, everything. You're free to go if that's what you want. And if I want to stay, then we start over." He took her hands in his, holding them like they were something precious. "No contracts. No arrangements. Just figuring this out together." Elena thought about everything she had lost in her life. Her mother, her father, her home, her faith in a world that kept knocking her down no matter how hard she tried to stand. And she thought about everything she had found in this place. In this man. "Okay," she said softly. "Let's figure it out together." The months that followed were not easy. Dante's world was dangerous, full of enemies and threats, and the constant pressure of maintaining an empire that walked the line between legitimate business and the darker dealings that had built the Moretti fortune. There were people who didn't approve of Elena. His associates, his family, the men who whispered behind his back that the great Dante Moretti had gone soft for a nobody with nothing to her name. There were nights when he came home covered in blood that wasn't his own, nights when he locked himself in his study and refused to let anyone in, nights when the weight of who he was and what he had done seemed to crush him into something barely recognizable. But there were also mornings when Elena woke to find him already awake, watching her sleep with an expression of such raw tenderness that it took her breath away. There were afternoons in the garden when he would kneel in the dirt beside her, planting flowers in memory of the sister he had lost, speaking to Elena about Isabella as though sharing those memories could somehow bring her back to life. There were evenings when he would press his hand to her growing belly and talk to their baby in Italian. Silly nonsense words that made Elena laugh even when she didn't understand them. He brought Miguel to live at the estate, setting him up in a suite of his own with a private tutor to help him prepare for college, a car of his own for his 17th birthday, and a promise that he would never want for anything again. He paid off every debt her father had ever accrued, ensuring that no shadow of the past could ever reach them. He introduced her to his world slowly, carefully, making sure she understood what she was stepping into while also making it clear that she could walk away at any moment without consequence. She didn't walk away. She stayed because she loved him, because he loved her, because somehow, impossibly, they had found something real in the ashes of a transaction that should have destroyed them both. The baby came on the first day of spring. Elena labored for 14 hours while Dante paced the halls of the private wing of the hospital he had rented for the occasion, threatening doctors, snapping at nurses, and generally making everyone's life miserable until she finally demanded that someone let him into the room just to shut him up. He held her hand through the final hours. He whispered encouragement and Italian endearments. He let her squeeze his fingers hard enough to leave bruises and never once complained. And when their daughter finally arrived, because it was a daughter, a perfect, screaming, red-faced little girl with her father's dark hair and her mother's stubborn chin, Dante Moretti, the butcher of Manhattan, the most feared man in the city, burst into tears. "She's beautiful," he managed, his voice cracking. "Elena, she's so beautiful. She looks like you." Poor thing, but he was smiling through his tears, cradling their daughter in arms that had done terrible things but held her like she was made of spun glass. "I hope she has your heart. And your stubbornness. God forbid." He leaned down to press a kiss to Elena's forehead, then to their daughters. "Thank you for staying, for choosing this, for giving me something I never knew I needed." Elena reached up to touch his face, wiping away a tear with her thumb. "You gave me the same thing," she said softly. "A reason to hope again." They named her Isabella. It wasn't the name they had planned. They had lists of names, debated for months, never quite agreeing on anything. But when Dante held his daughter for the first time and looked into her gray eyes, he knew. And Elena, watching the ghost of his grief transform into something new and alive, knew too. Isabella Maria Moretti. A new beginning born from old pain. The years that followed were not perfect. Dante's world remained dangerous, and there were times when Elena wondered if she had made a mistake, if she should have taken the money and run when she had the chance. There was the night Marco made his move. It happened when Isabella was 6 months old. Elena was nursing her in the quiet hours before dawn, rocking gently in the chair by the window, when she heard the first gunshot. Then another. Then a sound like shattering glass somewhere in the depths of the estate. She didn't scream, didn't panic. The months of living in Dante's world had taught her that panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. Instead, she moved. She grabbed the go-bag Dante had insisted she keep packed. Cash, documents, a burner phone, everything she would need to disappear if the worst ever happened. She wrapped Isabella in her warmest blanket and slipped through the hidden door behind the bookshelf. The one Dante had shown her on their third night together. The one that led to a tunnel that emerged half a mile from the estate. "Shoo, baby girl," she whispered as Isabella stirred against her chest. "Mama's got you. Mama's always got you." She was halfway through the tunnel when the lights came on. Marco Moretti stood at the far end, flanked by 4 men with guns. He looked so much like Dante that it made her stomach turn. The same dark hair, the same strong jaw, the same height and build. But where Dante's eyes were storm clouds, Marco's were empty, flat, dead things that had never known warmth. "Hello, cousin's little whore," he said pleasantly. "Going somewhere?"
Elena Cluched Isabella Tichter. Marco.
"You know, I almost admire you." He strolled toward her, casual as if they were meeting for coffee. "When I heard Dante had brought some nobody into his home, I assumed you were just another plaything, a distraction, but you've lasted longer than any of the others. You even managed to give him a brat. She's just a baby." "She's an obstacle." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "You see, my dear cousin has been very clever, setting up all sorts of legal protections for his little family. Trusts and inheritance clauses and enough paperwork to choke an army of lawyers. If I want what's rightfully mine, I need to eliminate complications." Please, Elena hated the word, hated how weak it sounded, but she would beg on her knees if it meant keeping her daughter safe. "Please, she's innocent. She's never done anything to you. I'll give you whatever you want." "What I want is for Dante to suffer the way I've suffered." Marco's pleasant facade cracked, revealing something ugly and festering beneath. "Do you know what it's like, growing up in his shadow? The favorite grandson, the chosen heir. Everything I ever wanted, handed to him like he was born deserving it. So this is about jealousy? About inheritance? This is about justice." He raised his gun, pointing it not at Elena but at the bundle in her arms. "And justice starts now." Elena turned, shielding Isabella with her body. She closed her eyes and waited for the sound of the shot, for the pain that would end everything. It never came. Instead, she heard a sound like thunder, then a wet gurgle, then the thud of a body hitting concrete. She turned to find Dante standing over Marco's corpse, his gun still smoking, his chest heaving with ragged breaths. Blood spattered his white shirt, not his own. His eyes were wild, feral, more animal than man as they swept from Marco's body to Elena and Isabella. "Are you hurt?" His voice was barely human.
No.
"No, we're okay. We're." He was across the tunnel in 3 strides, pulling them both into his arms, crushing them against his chest like he could absorb them into himself. His whole body was shaking with rage, with fear, with the aftermath of adrenaline flooding through his system. "I thought I lost you." The words came out broken, scattered. "I heard the shots and I thought he—" "We're okay." Elena freed one hand to cup his face, forcing him to look at her. "Dante, look at me. We're okay. Isabella's okay. You saved us." "I should have killed him years ago." His jaw was tight, tears cutting tracks through the blood on his face. "I knew what he was. I knew he'd never stop. But I kept hoping. I kept thinking maybe." "Sure," she pressed her forehead to his. "Isabella's safe between them. It's over now. It's done." "It's not done," he pulled back, and she saw the decision crystallize in his eyes. "This world, my world. It's never going to be safe for you, for her. As long as I'm who I am, there will always be another Marco, another enemy, another threat." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I have to choose." He looked down at Isabella, who had somehow slept through the entire ordeal. Her tiny fist curled around Dante's blood-stained finger. "The Empire or my family. I can't protect both." Elena's heart stuttered. "Dante, you don't have to." "Yes, I do." He met her eyes, and she saw something there she had never seen before. Resolution. "I've spent my entire life becoming my father, building something he would be proud of. And it took almost losing you, losing both of you, to realize that I don't want to be my father. I don't want Isabella to grow up in a world where she has to run through tunnels in the middle of the night because someone wants her dead. What about the family, the business, everything you've built?" "Let it burn," he said it simply, like he was discussing the weather. "Let it all burn. There's enough legitimate money to last 100 lifetimes. We can disappear. Start over somewhere no one knows the name Moretti. Raise our daughter somewhere she can be safe and happy and free." Elena stared at him. This man who had been raised to value power above all else, who had clawed his way to the top of an empire built on blood and fear, who had told her on their very first meeting that he didn't know the meaning of mercy. He was offering to give up everything. For her. For their daughter. For the chance at something ordinary and peaceful and good. "Are you sure?" she whispered. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." She kissed him then, surrounded by blood and bodies and the wreckage of the world they were leaving behind. She kissed him and tasted salt. Tears, his and hers, mingled together into something that felt like baptism. "Okay," she said against his lips. "Let's start over." The transition took time. Dante spent the next year carefully dismantling his empire, transferring power to lieutenants he trusted, liquidating assets that couldn't be moved, ensuring that the Moretti name would fade into history rather than explode into chaos. There were challenges, betrayals, men who saw his departure as weakness and tried to take advantage. He dealt with each of them, not with violence, or at least not always, but with the cold, calculated intelligence that had made him the most powerful man in the city. By the time he was done, there was nothing left to fight over. The Moretti Empire had become a ghost, its bones picked clean and scattered to the winds. They moved to a small town in Tuscany. Elena had never seen Dante in a place like this, away from the suits and the security and the constant weight of leadership. Here, he wore jeans and linen shirts. He grew a beard that made him look younger, softer. He learned to cook from an old woman in the village who adopted him like a lost son and made him chop vegetables for hours while she told stories about the war. He planted a garden. He learned to make wine. He built a treehouse for Isabella in the ancient oak behind their villa and spent entire afternoons playing make-believe with her, letting her dress him up as a dragon or a pirate or whatever her imagination demanded. Elena watched him transform before her eyes. The darkness that had always lurked behind his storm cloud eyes began to fade, replaced by something lighter, warmer. The lines of tension around his mouth smoothed out. The nightmares that had plagued him for years came less and less often, until eventually they stopped altogether. He became, against all odds, a good father. Not the distant, demanding patriarch his own father had been, but something gentler. He read Isabella bedtime stories in 3 languages. He taught her to ride horses on the rolling hills behind their property. He let her paint his nails and braid his hair and covered every surface of their home with her artwork, treating each crayon scribble like it belonged in a museum. "She's going to be spoiled," Elena said one evening, watching Dante carry a sleeping Isabella back from the olive grove where they had spent the afternoon counting butterflies. "Good," he pressed a kiss to his daughter's dark curls. "She deserves to be spoiled. She deserves everything beautiful and good in this world." "And what about you? Do you miss it? The power? The fear?" He considered the question as he settled Isabella into her bed, tucking the blankets around her small form with a tenderness that still caught Elena off guard sometimes. "No," he said finally, joining her in the doorway, his arms sliding around her waist. "I spent 30 years being afraid. Afraid of my father, afraid of my enemies, afraid of being weak. I thought power was the only thing that could keep me safe." He turned to look at her, and she saw nothing but love in his eyes. "I was wrong. You, Isabella, this life we've built, this is what keeps me safe. This is what makes me strong." Elena leaned into him, breathing in the scent of sunshine and olive oil and home. "I love you," she said, because even after all these years, she never got tired of saying it. "I love you too." He kissed the top of her head. "Thank you for taking a chance on a monster. You were never a monster. You were just lost. And you found me." She smiled against his chest. "We found each other." 3 years after their move to Tuscany, Elena gave birth to their second child. A son this time, with his mother's dark eyes and his father's stubborn chin. They named him Antonio after Dante's grandfather. Not the one who had written the will that had brought them together, but an earlier one, a simple farmer who had emigrated from Italy to America with nothing but hope and determination. Isabella adored her baby brother with a fierceness that reminded Elena of Dante. She insisted on helping with everything. Feeding, changing, even the midnight wake-ups that left everyone exhausted and cranky. She sang him lullabies in Italian and English and the made-up language she had invented just for him, and she glared at anyone who tried to hold him for too long. "Mine," she would announce, tiny arms wrapped protectively around the baby. "My brother. You have to share," Dante would tell her, struggling to keep a straight face. No, she had inherited his stubbornness along with his hair. Mine. Miguel came to visit often, bringing stories of his life at university. He was studying medicine now, determined to help people the way no one had been able to help their mother. He had grown into a good man, strong and kind and nothing like the frightened boy Elena remembered from their tiny apartment in the city. "You look happy," he told her one afternoon, watching Dante chase Isabella through the vineyard while Antonio napped in Elena's arms. "Really happy. Not just pretending to be okay happy." "I am happy." She couldn't help the smile that spread across her face. "I never thought this would be my life. You know? When I walked into that mansion, I was so sure it was going to destroy me. That he was going to destroy me. But he didn't." "No." She watched Dante scoop Isabella up and spin her around, their laughter carrying across the hills. "He saved me instead. And I saved him. We saved each other." Miguel was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Mom would have liked him." Elena's throat tightened. "You think so?" "Yeah. She always said the measure of a man wasn't what he'd done, but what he was willing to do for the people he loved." He nodded toward Dante. "He gave up everything for you, for your family. That's not nothing." "No," Elena agreed, blinking back tears. "That's everything." The sun began to set over the Tuscan hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose and deepest purple. Dante carried Isabella back toward the villa, her sleepy head resting on his shoulder, and he caught Elena's eye across the distance. He smiled. It was such a simple thing, that smile. Nothing dramatic or earth-shattering. Just a man looking at his wife with love and gratitude and the quiet contentment of someone who had finally found his place in the world. But it was enough. It was more than enough. Elena rose to meet him, Antonio stirring in her arms. Dante's free hand found hers, their fingers intertwining with the ease of long practice. "Happy?" he asked. "Yes." "Good." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Me too." They walked back to the villa together, their children safe in their arms, their past behind them, their future stretching out before them like a promise. It wasn't the ending Elena had expected when she had signed that contract in her tiny apartment, desperate and afraid and certain she was selling her soul to survive. It was better. It was everything. And as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Elena Vasquez, Elena Moretti now, though she still sometimes forgot, sent a silent thank you to whatever force had brought her to that mansion on that rainy night. She had gone looking for mercy and found love instead. She had gone to pay off a debt and received a gift beyond measure. She had walked into the monster's lair and discovered that sometimes, the monster just needs someone to see the man hiding beneath the beast. Dante squeezed her hand, as if he knew what she was thinking. He probably did. After all these years, they had learned to read each other like books. Every expression, every silence, every unspoken word. "No regrets?" he asked. Elena looked at her daughter, already asleep against her father's shoulder. At her son, making small sounds of contentment in her arms. At the man she loved, who had crossed oceans of darkness to become someone worthy of this life they had built together. "No," she said, "not a single one." And she meant it. Every word. Forever. The end.